Hello everyone, I'm here today to do another video about my Read Around the World project, and this time we're going to focus on East Africa. So that includes Eritrea, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Somalia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, and South Sudan. So let's start with Eritrea. For Eritrea, I read African Titanics by Abu Bakr Kal, which is a very short book about an immigrant from Eritrea fleeing the country, and basically what his life was when he was trying to make it to Europe, I think it was. And this is a very short book, so there is not a lot of depth analysis or anything about it. I read this roughly at the same time as I read The Fourth Time We Drown, and that is a non-fiction written by an Irish woman about immigrants coming from Africa into Europe and how they get stuck often and how badly they're treated. And I think that paired really well, because a lot of these immigrants coming from Africa are from Eritrea, because Eritrea is a war-torn country. And I did do a review of this book by itself, so I will link it down below. But overall, I think it was quite simple in its approach. So it was an interesting enough read, but obviously because it's about someone trying to flee Eritrea, I didn't get a lot of sense about Eritrea itself, and also I didn't feel like this gave me much information about what Eritrea is like. So I didn't dislike it, but I would not mind if I find something else to read from Eritrea, because this is not enough to it's never enough, but it's very limited in the scope that it shows. The next country is Djibouti, and for Djibouti I read The Nomads, My Brothers So Out to Drink from the Big Dipper by Abdourahman Waberi. And this is a poetry collection, and some of the poems do relate to Djibouti more than others. Overall, I think it was a good poetry collection, but I don't think that it gave me a particular sense of Djibouti or anything. So I would like to know more about it. So let me know if you have any other recommendations. For Ethiopia, I have read several books. So I've read The Shadow King by Meja Mwangi and Children of the Revolution and All Our Names by Dinaw Mengestu. And I have a review for The Shadow King, so I will link it down below. I think I also have a vlog in which I read one of the other two books. And so for The Shadow King, I would say that it is a very interesting book. It's very literary, and it's set in the war between Ethiopia and Italy, when Italy tried to colonize it in the 40s, I think it was. And it follows a woman or a girl that fights in the Revolutionary War, like the Independence War. And how, not secretly, but like underlying, there is a lot of women that fought that war, and they are kind of forgotten by the history. And we have also like the present timeline in which this fact is kind of discovered. That's a very small part of the book, but it's there. I thought that the story was very promising, but I just didn't gel with the way it was written, unfortunately. But I know that a lot of people did, so I will not suggest that you don't read this one, but proceed with caution, I will say. And then Dinaw Mengestu, it's a lot more straightforward. Children of the Revolution, if I remember correctly, was set in a diner in the US by an immigrant from Ethiopia, and I think a lot of his stories are for immigrants, because he is an immigrant himself, I think. And a lot of it deals with the political unrest in Ethiopia and how that made a lot of people leave, and how their lives are outside Ethiopia, which again, it's fine. I think they are worth stories to read. I just don't think that they are like the best stories out there. Then for Somalia, I have also 2 books. The first one is Heretic by Ayaan and she's a feminist from Somalia that had to flee the country because of the war and the political unrest that is going on there, and she came to the Netherlands, and I think after that she went to the US. And she talks in this about Islam and about feminism and about freedom, and how the West has kind of become afraid of saying anything against Islam because it comes across as patronizing and as uncultured. Like we are not allowing ourselves to say bad things about other cultures that we don't know, which I think it's reasonable. But she argues that is allowing radical Islam to become worse, and that the people inside Islam that are fighting for Islam to change and be a more open and more accepting religion are failing, and they need help. And that conflict between not wanting to intervene too much but at the same time letting bad things happen, and it's a lot of food for thought. I don't know how much I agree on absolutely everything with her, but I think she has a point that is worth considering as well. And then the other one that I have for Somalia is The Fortune Men by Nadifa Mohammed. So actually Nadifa Mohammed is a Welsh author, but she is of Somali descent, and this book is about a Somalian living in Wales that is charged with murder, and how the whole system comes down on him, and then it turns out that it was not him, but his life was still destroyed, and how that happened. Again, I have a review of that book in my channel, so I will link it down below. And that one I liked, but I didn't love. I thought that the pacing was a little bit weird, so yeah, but it's not a bad book. Then the next country is Kenya, and I'm not going to go through all the books that I've read for Kenya because they're more than the average. I will just say The Wizard Crow by Ngugi wa Thiong'o is one of my favorite books of all time. I have a review for it in my channel as well that I will link. Ngugi wa Thiong'o is a very smart and very imaginative man. He has written a lot of books, and I have read several of them. I also really recommend Decolonizing the Mind if you are into non-fiction, which is about how colonial powers affect our way to do and perceive literature. And he talks, for example, about the fact that many African countries are not considered very literary because most of their literature is oral, so there are no physical books to read, and that oral tradition has been devalued as a form of literature. He also talks about how it is different to write in your mother tongue or on the colonizer's language, and that's why he decided that from that certain point onwards he was only going to write in Gikuyu, which is his tribal language, and he translates his books himself, but the first expression of his books is in Gikuyu, and that changes the way that he expresses them, which was very interesting. I also have a review for The Perfect Nine for him, which is a book that retells the story of the foundation of the Gikuyu people, and makes a feminist twist to it, and I really enjoyed that. I don't think that's maybe for everybody, because I do have some preconceived knowledge of Gikuyu people because I've lived in Kenya, and my husband is Kenyan, so I do have that connection, and I probably know more about the country and certain tribes there than the average person. But still, it was very interesting to me, and I think that it can still be enjoyed by people that don't have that background. Then another author person that I thoroughly love is Wangari Mathaai. Unfortunately, she passed away some years ago, but she was an environmentalist, and she won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004 for her environmental work. She has been defending the forests in Kenya and the biological balance there, and I think she was the first person to win a Nobel Peace Prize for environmental reasons rather than war reasons, if you know what I mean. And you can read several. She has 2 or 3 books, I think, but the one I would recommend at least first is Unbowed, which is her memoir about her work and how she came to be there, and all her feisty but also kind energy can be seen in that book, and I think she's an amazing woman, and more people should know about her. And then another author that I think it's worth checking out is Meja Mwangi. He's reasonably modern classic, I would say. I have read The Cockroach Dance by him, and I enjoyed it. I think it was about a man that lives in relatively poor conditions in Nairobi and how he makes do with what he has. And the language is quite a little bit crass sometimes, but I think it also reflects kind of like the vibe and the atmosphere of Nairobi quite well, so I like that as well. I also wanted to talk about a very niche book that that many people are not interested in at all in it, but it's Nairobi Matatu Men by Mbugua Mungai, and this is like an academic book about Nairobi Matatu Men. And if you don't know what that means, matatus are kind of like the buses that are used in Nairobi to move people, like public transport, but there is a whole culture around them. They decorate them with crazy colors. Some of them are like discotheques inside. They have screens showing video clips. They have all these neon lights at night. It's crazy. And there is also a culture within the people that work those rounds. They also drive incredibly dangerously. And it's a whole phenomenon in Nairobi, and this book looks at it from a very academic and socioeconomic point of view, which I thought it was really interesting, but I understand it's completely niche. Then for Uganda, I have read 2 books. One of them was The First Woman by Jennifer Nansubuga Makumbi, which is about a girl in Uganda that goes to a private school, and there are some family mysteries that she's trying to figure out about her dad and her mom and their relationship, and she's also finding things about the subtle feminist tones of some of the stories, traditional folklore stories in her culture that she didn't know about, that are not commonly told, and how she relates to them. I thought it was fine. It's kind of a little bit magical realism. It has touches of it, and I thought it was fine. It's a fast read, I will say, and it's one of those books that you can really immerse yourself into and just read quite fast and quite easily, but it doesn't leave a very long-lasting impression on me, at least. So yeah, that's the first woman. And then the other one I read for Uganda is A Bigger Picture by Vanessa Nakate, and this is a non-fiction book. Vanessa Nakate is a climate activist, and she's from Uganda. And because she is from Uganda, she has often been sidelined from the mainstream climate activism by the media, not by the climate activists themselves. She often talks about meeting Greta Thunberg and how nice she was, and how the media cut her from a picture of young climate activists when she was with her. So yeah, there is a lot of that, but there is also a lot of how she first got into it, how things are different in other countries. Like in Uganda, it's not as simple as I'm going to demonstrate in the streets, because that is often not allowed by the policemen. They are a lot more suspicious if you are trying to do that, and there is also the aspect of culturally women are perceived a certain way, and so she does not have the freedom to do all the things that she would like to do. So there are a lot of things like that going on in this book, and I mean, literary wise, it's no masterpiece, but I think it was very honest and very raw, and I don't think you read this book for the literary similes and metaphors and stuff like that. So I think it did what it wanted to do really well, and I think it's a perspective that is worth listening to, because we don't have a lot of this input from people like that, and I think it's important to realize that it's not just the Greta Thunbergs of the world that are trying to stop climate change. It's also the Vanessa Nakates of the world. So yeah, I think that's a very valuable book. Then for Tanzania, I read Afterlife by Abdul Razak Gurna, and I believe he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 2021. And this book is about kind of three people in 1910s to 1940s in Tanzania. So the young people two of them are young men that go to become soldiers for the Germans, because the Germans were colonizing Tanzania. And then the other person that we follow is the sister of one of them, and the wife of the other. Let's say they are brothers-in-law. I think that this was very interesting. I was loving it the first half or so, and when they were talking about the German occupation and how these people were becoming soldiers for them, and how those dynamics work, and then the Germans have to leave and the British take over, and we obviously follow the First World War and the Second World War within that context. And I felt like the second part, it was kind of like waiting in between the wars to kind of get to the point. So the Ilias, the brother, he was lost around the First World War, and they don't know what happened to him. And so after that, after the war, and like people come home and all of that, there is a big chunk of it of the other guy rebuilding his life after war, and then meeting this guy's sister and marrying her and having children with her. And then there is this whole new thing about finding the brother, and what happened to him. And like that, in between, it just felt like the story should have finished already, and it didn't, and it was like the pacing was really a little bit weird, but I think the writing was very good, and the idea of the story, it was very interesting. It's just the way it was told was not as effective as I would have liked, and I learned a lot about like German occupation around there. I didn't know that when the Nazis came back to power, there was a big movement to take back the colonies. That was a thing, and I didn't know about it, and now I know about it. So yeah, I think this book it has a lot of value, and I would be interested to read more from this author. It's just the particular storytelling in this book didn't quite work as I wanted it to work. For Rwanda, again, I have read 2 books, although there is a third one that I could talk about because it's about Rwanda. But first of all, the first one I want to talk about Rwanda is 100 Days by Juliane Okoy Bitek. And this is a poetry collection, and it's one poem for every day of the Rwandan genocide, and you can see the desperation of those days really coming through. Like, it's really emotional in a very, very raw way, and I love this book, so I will 100% recommend. And the other one that I read for Rwanda is Our Lady of the Nile by Scholastique Mukasonga, and I have seen a lot of people rave about Scholastique Mukasonga, and I think I want to read Cockroaches, but this one I didn't care so much about. Like, there was aspects of it that I liked, but yeah, so this one is about a girl in a boarding school in Rwanda, and then the time of the Rwandan genocide happened kind of at the second half of the book, but it's kind of damped because they are in this very remote boarding school, so they don't get affected as much, and a lot of the book is dedicated to this schoolgirl affair with an adult man, and I was just not in for that. So yeah, I would like to read more from her, but this book particularly did not strike a chord with me. And the other one I was going to say that I would recommend, although it's not from a Rwandan author, is Do Not Disturb by Michaela Wrong, and that is a lot more recent times. So Michaela Wrong is a journalist in East Africa. She has also written one book called It's Our Time to Eat about Kenya and the politics in Kenya, and Do Not Disturb is about Paul Kagame, who is the president of Rwanda at the moment, and how his regime is really, really scary, even though we don't normally see that aspect of it, because he is doing a lot of good things as well. He has a lot of social programs, and he has a lot of renewable energies and a lot of initiatives to stop plastic and stop pollution and all of these things that the West cares about. But the way that he's doing that is very oppressive, and in the political sense of, like, if someone criticizes him inside Rwanda, they are going to get punished. So it was very interesting to hear about, because from before I read that book, the only thing I knew about Paul Kagame was that he was doing really good things about one single plastics and renewable energies and all of that, and knowing that he's like very vicious in other aspects was yeah, it was interesting. For Burundi, I read Les Oniriques by Roland Rugero, and this was I think it was a poetry collection or like a novella kind of thing. It was very short, and I don't remember much of it, which probably tells you a lot about that. I think the writing was really beautiful and poetic, but yeah, the story was not memorable at all, by the fact that I don't remember it. And then finally, for South Sudan, I read Another Last Word by Taban Lo LIyong, and this was a non-fiction book about it was a lot of literary theory, and some of the things that he said went way above my head, and he talks a lot about a lot of authors, classical authors from East Africa that I didn't always know. So yeah, there were some interesting aspects of that book, but yeah, there was also a lot of plowing through stuff. So if you have any recommendations for either Burundi or South Sudan, I would be open to them, because I didn't completely enjoy those books. But yeah, those are all the things that I read for this part of my Read Around the World project. I hope you liked this video. Let me know if you have read anything from the books I have discussed, or if you have any other recommendations. And until next video.